Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are out there in Radioland. Yes, this is Isaac George back again with my second edition of my show on Yin Radio TV, and we have a very, very special show lined up tonight. For those of you who want to know a little bit about myself, the host, I would invite you to go and visit my website, www.isaacgeorge.com. I wear a variety of hats, but one of my favorites is evolutionary astrology, and especially the branch of astrology that deals with the nature of relationships. And that's the topic of tonight's show. We have a very good friend and also a very amazing astrologer by the name of Armand Diaz, who's residing somewhere in the New York City area. And he's quite experienced in a lot of different things, and one of the things that he's really good at is this area of relationships. Armand has got a lot of experience in all branches of astrology. He's written 4 books, and one of them is called Separating Aspects. So this whole thing about relationship right now is very up for a lot of people, and myself included. Over the past 2 decades, it's been one of my most important areas of my experience in spiritual sense and as personal interest in terms of what makes relationships tick, what makes relationships struggle, what's the challenge of them. So as we have discussed in coming up with an idea of a one-shot idea of what this show is about, we're basically here in the second decade of the 21st century, and we're seeing an acceleration within people of all genders. And this acceleration is that the old patterns and the old ways of thinking are not working anymore. So we're not sure what's coming next. There's no manual, there's no guide. We're trying to come up with things in the spur of the moment, and people are looking for answers. So in this particular program tonight, we'll explore what astrology has to say about relationships and how they're changing into new forms, or we're inventing new forms. Armand is a PhD. He's a consulting astrologer with a practice based in New York City and also an international clientele. In addition to consulting, he speaks on astrology nationally and internationally. Armand is the author or editor of 4 books, including the most recent, which I mentioned, Separating Aspects on Relationship Astrology. He also is a books and articles editor for the Astrology News Service and is agent number 17 for the Cosmic Intelligence Agency. Armand can be reached via his website at integralastrology.net. That's INTEGRAL astrology.net. Armand, are you with us on the show tonight?
I am here, Isaac. Yes, thank you.
All right, welcome, and it's great to have you here tonight. And we've got a lot of ground to cover in a very short period of time. And one of the things that we discussed earlier was to start off the conversation about what is going on with relationships. Doesn't matter for heterosexual, homosexual. Relationships are a big deal, more so it seems like in the last couple of decades of the last century and the first decade and a half of this one. What, in your opinion, is the most what's the biggest talking point about it? What's going on right now in this century we're in now? From your perspective.
From an astrological perspective. I noticed in your introduction you said that I was an expert on relationships. I'm an expert on relationship astrology. When it comes to relationships, just as much of astrology, we have to recognize that there have been some huge macro changes that have taken place over the course of the past several decades, really going back to the mid-20th century. And it's a bit of a story, but we can get through it kind of quickly. One thing that I think it's important for us all to recognize is that our view of relationship, our view of what a relationship is and how it functions and what it's supposed to be, and of course there's always many different, at any time there's probably as many different iterations of that as there are people alive. Absolutely. But there's some trends. There's some things that we can see and so on. Like so many things, wherever you come into the game, wherever things seem to start from your perspective, seems to be, the way that things should be or ought to be. I remember thinking this about baseball. When they broke up the two American the two baseball leagues in America into 3 divisions instead of 2. I thought it was a travesty. And then I realized that my favorite team was an expansion team that was born the year I was born, and so probably people were thinking the same thing about things when I was a kid, and so. Wherever we come into the picture, we think what to do as we encounter changing conditions. And so there's many different images of what relationship is supposed to be. But I think that the generation that was born in the 40s and through about the mid-50s, the generation that was born with Neptune and Libra, did a lot to define our views of relationship, really through the current time. I mean, we could go back. We could go back to the Middle Ages, and we could go back to the troubadours. I mean, you can go back as far as you like with it, but
from the beginnings of romantic love and all the poetry and all the chivalry and everything. Yeah, I mean, it goes. There's all these cycles that we see over the last 2,000 years.
Right, exactly. And then romantic love versus, let's say, marriage. What is your personal inclination versus what is sort of the contractual obligation. Even in fact, one thing, when you go back in time, and I'm hesitant to make this statement, but it doesn't seem to me that there was a very sharp differentiation between love and lust. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, this brings into the categorical conundrum with the human condition. Spiritual animal. This was brought up in that book recently that came out like 3 or 4 years ago called Sex at Dawn, looking at our ancestral roots prior to the agricultural revolution and when we were foraging, gathering societies, mostly matriarchal based. There was a different set of circumstances. That seems to be coming around. I mean, there's this explosion of people exploring different love styles, lifestyles, relationship arrangements. It's like nothing that we have seen in form for the last 1,800 years ago seems to be sacrosanct anymore. As far as social contracts or marriage is the thing you have to do. People are breaking out and trying different things.
Yeah, most certainly. I think again, if you jump to that 40s, 50s time period, there was at least a kind of image, and a big part of it, and I speak to American television audiences because it is my greatest mythological reference.
Same here. I grew up in the 50s. Yeah, exactly.
So it was Ozzy and Harriet and maybe the Brady Bunch or something like that. Well, the Brady Bunch actually represented a little bit of a change, but it was that kind of Leave It to Beaver, Father Knows Best type of. Despite all of those changes that you're talking about.
Oh yeah, it's
right. Is it not the case that so many of us have such a we have sort of an attachment to that image, and then so that was Neptune going through the sign of Libra, and then in the 70s Pluto and Uranus went through the sign of Libra. And the planet of deep transformation and the planet of revolution said, well, that's a nice picture you guys have there.
Yeah.
But we're going to maybe change things a little bit. And
alter the landscape. Yep.
Very much so. And all of those changes, well, I wouldn't say all of them, but many of those changes that you're talking about, certainly in spirit, the changes that you're talking about, of the new forms of relationship, were like I wouldn't say they got started in the 70s, but they came to prominence. They came to public consciousness.
Well, there was something that happened with that Pluto and Libra generation, and it was funny because another astrologer mentioned this about Pluto and Libra people in particular, that it was, from his perspective, the first generation in modern times that were looking at the whole marriage thing. And he summed it up in one of the phrases from the vow, which is "till death do us part." ... maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was all thrown into question. Uranus comes in and does the same thing. So,
yeah, very much, very, very, very. That's great. That is the qualification that came there, and the generation that was born at that, the Neptune and Libra generation, the people that were born in the 40s and the 50s, they really embodied they really embodied the whole relationship. They really embodied the whole love angle of things. This is the generation that was young and active in the 60s. The anthem was "All You Need Is Love," and
yeah, exactly.
And they're the ones that got hit with the changes when Pluto and everybody, the older generations as well, got hit with these changes when Pluto and Uranus went through Libra. And yet, yes, the generation that is born at a particular time sort of embodies and carries what's happening at that time forward in a sort of, they work on it, and they work on it from all sides. I find that the Pluto in Libra generation will either really, really want a traditional type of relationship, or really, really isn't too concerned about it. But really, really, either way, really, really cares about relationship. Really, really, it's important.
Yes. It's compulsive. It's compulsive.
Often, yeah. Often, you see this. It's such a very important thing. Some really do want a very, whatever they see as standard traditional relationship, and some don't care about that at all. But it doesn't seem like it's an unimportant thing. Mention a different side to things. Neptune, of course, then went into Scorpio, and in the 60s, and then Uranus and Pluto. Uranus in the later part of the 70s, while Pluto was still in Libra, went into Scorpio, and this is the sign that we associate quite a bit with sexuality. And we get different flavors of that Pluto in Libra generation.
Well, the Pluto in Scorpio generation is when things like AIDS started appearing. Pluto is the Lord of Death, and then you get the sign of Scorpio and sexuality, and it's weird how that turned all the free love stuff from the 60s and 70s on its head.
Yes, exactly. The sexual revolution came crashing down.
Totally.
In a very short period of time. Personally, I remember going to college, and that was pretty much it. I got there, and
you missed the party.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's this sort of going back, and I find though that if you if we're talking about different attitudes and so on, I find the Pluto and Libra generation on things like gay marriage, because just as a political issue, Pluto and Libra generation is you should be able to, have the relationship that you want. You should be able to love who you want. It doesn't matter. Right. Pluto and Scorpio generation is a little bit like, well, you should be able to have sex with whoever you want. Yeah. There's a strong pro on both sides of it, but there is a little bit of a different subtlety to it. There's a different shading to it.
Well, when you get into that and you bring into the Uranian factor, Uranus and Scorpio, and even Uranus at this time, Uranus and Aries, freedom, independence, and so forth. But the thing about Uranus is it brings in the transpersonal aspect, and so it's like, and to some extent a spiritual aspect. So it's you get into this idea of, people wanting soulful relationships, soulful sex, and they've got the Pluto-Uranus thing going on. So it's just an aside, but I see this over those decades, the 80s, 90s, the noughties, and now. The whole cycle.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and I think the Pluto and Scorpio generation cares an awful lot about that soulfulness. Actually, on every level, in every area of life too. I think they recognize they were born at a time when let alone the economic changes that happened, and and also to the level of crime and stuff like that. That was certainly in the United States. That was the time of the crack epidemic and so on.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was the time when sex, could very it could very much equal death. And it was this, and they carry some of that goth type of influence forward. And this is the generation that thinks that that has made vampires sexy and so on. This is a generation that is dealing with tough stuff. It's like, vampires are dead people. Let's
yeah, exactly.
Let's not mince words here.
Yeah.
But they're looking for the sexy side. So they've carried a lot of that energy forward. In more recent years, of course, we have the Uranus-Pluto square, and I think that has brought up a lot of the stuff from the 60s and the 70s.
Absolutely.
Yeah, hasn't it? There's been a great revisit on things. When Saturn went through Libra, sort of following up, sort of coming back, 30, 40 years later after Uranus and Pluto, Saturn went through Libra, and that's when gay marriage became the big debate. And so
that's when it became a political football, social one as well. So
yes, yeah, a very big social political point. So the way I see it is that now, the idea of openness and we can try different things, and there's different forms of relationship is something that we're approaching, but we're approaching it with a little hesitation because we sort of still hold on a little bit to the image, as it were. Although the image works for a lot of people too. That's let's not discard entirely. You don't have to fit everybody into that particular box.
No. Well, there's an emotional attachment to I think that we are creatures that want to bond deeply. There's this drive, this oxytocin drive. It's a tribal thing. I think it's probably from our primal memory of wanting to bond deeply within the tribe, but we've lacked that tribal sense for centuries, if not thousands of years. And so coming into relationship now, people are going deeper faster, or they're opening up, or their boundaries are not as much. Maybe this is partly due to the Iranian revolution and social media. And things happen so much faster, and things change so much faster, and things fall apart faster. It's like it's here today, gone tomorrow, which doesn't lend a lot of sense of security to anything. If you don't have any security with your primary partner or with your family or your tribe, then the rest of the world is chaos going on, and it makes everything feel extremely stressful.
Well, that's an excellent point, and the key word for me in there that you mentioned that is really right on target is security.
Yep.
Because and there's a lot of complexity to this. There's a lot of individual. We could think about this like for each individual and so on. But one thing that happened also in the 70s when Uranus and Pluto went through Libra was the women's movement. And
yes.
now, but now there is not equal pay for women, and that is a travesty. And there are all kinds of things that still need to be done. But with women in the workforce and with women leading in many professions, many prestige professions, the whole thing about who, like, I need you for security purposes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It becomes something that I think, like, many young people probably cannot even grasp how ubiquitous it was that a woman who would had been dependent on her husband for X number of years and hadn't worked was essentially stuck.
Yeah.
But now, in a sense, I don't know how many of us are doing all that well, but we're all kind of equally doing about the same. And, we're all trying to figure. Right?
Yeah, there's equanimity there. Either we're doing all well together, or we're doing moderately well together, or we're mediocre. But basically, I think we're seeing one of the things that we're seeing is that there's a lot of confusion in the masculine side of things. It's like, what is my role now? If I'm not the caveman, if I'm not the new age guy, what am I now? And because women are going into more an independent stance, I'm not sure where we tie that into astrological transits. But the women, are entrepreneurs. They're walking away from their traditional structures, even if they're still in a family, and they're wanting to go out there and do sort of the guy thing in a way, and they're going into their yang, their feminine yang. And the men are still kind of floundering around back in the 90s going, well, should I meditate? It's like they're still in their masculine yin. And it's like, where does the astrology of that come in? And it's like, I know you and I discussed, let's look at sun and moon signs and then go from there. But it's like, I think there's a lot of confusion out there right now, not just about sexuality and about gender, but about roles.
Very, very much so. Very, very much so. I really do think that it's a very good point, and there's nothing too obvious about Uranus and Pluto going through Libra to suggest that would have been a breakdown. But Libra is a very formal sign, and it has a lot to do with the rules and the mores and so on. And it certainly did spawn. I suppose you would want to say that. It was a following up on the civil rights movement that probably while Uranus was still while Pluto was still in Virgo, that the gay rights movement, the women's movement, and so on, really
civil rights movement. Yeah, it all dovetailed the rising of the feminist movement in the 70s, which seems to correspond with the Pluto-Uranus thing. That all those things took root during that era, the 60s and 70s, and now we're dealing with the other shoe dropping with the Uranus-Pluto squares.
I'm sorry, Isaac. I lost you for a second there. Can you repeat that?
Oh, okay. I said what I was saying is that those 3 or 4 major revolutions in the 60s and the 70s, the feminist revolution in the 70s, seemed to dovetail with we had the Pluto-Uranus conjunction in the 60s. That was the first trigger. Then Uranus-Pluto and Libra, and now we've gone through the 4 Pluto-Uranus squares, or 7 Pluto-Uranus squares over the last 4 years, and that seems to be a revisiting and an evolutionary leaping off point from where it was in the 60s and 70s. Can you still not hear me? What happened?
You're back now.
Okay, I don't know what happened. Let's skip ahead.
I got as far as the 7 Uranus Pluto squares, and I think that all of these issues have been revisited, as you said, and we're we think to ourselves, well, how can we go forward? We recognize that that a lot of the way we constructed relationships going back hundreds of years had a lot to do apart from any of those things. But then how do we deal with form? What are we going to do? How are we going to run this thing? And and then again, I still have some security issues. We still have some idealism about things. Some pretty images that.
I'm having either trouble with the internet. I just wanted to say this to the show producer as well. I'm having either trouble with the internet here or it's with my headset. I'm not sure what it is, but if there's a dropout, just keep rolling. I'll be with you. But did you want to talk a little bit about the how the sun and moon signs react to these changes? There's a lot of people out there probably listening going, well, I'm a sun in Cancer and I want security, and somebody else wants, I'm a sun in Aries and I want to have freedom.
Yeah, we don't know where we're going. We recognize that there's a breakdown of what we had relied on for a while, and it's liberating on the one hand, and it's a little scary on the other. Mm-hmm. And at that level, we can start to think, okay, well, how are we going to react to this? We don't know where we're going, but how do we react? How do we react to having the GPS go off?
Exactly.
And I think the moon is probably the planet to look at first.
Okay.
I would say that's the first thing I'd look at, and you have to use a little bit of astrological guess.
Folks, we're having a little bit of technical difficulty on one side of the Atlantic or the other. By the way, I'm in the UK now, out of Ireland, and I'm actually hanging around very close to Somerset, which is, Avalon, Glastonbury. This is a very wonderful and magical place, and I'm really glad to have made the switch back. I used to live in Scotland. From 2004 to 2010. Now, getting back to the astrological question here until we get our guest back. We've lost the internet connection on the other end, apparently. Until we get Armand back, one of the things that's very personal in a sense of my particular astrology, and I'm sure everybody out there has some conflicts with their own particular blueprint, but it's like, what do you do when you have a sun in Cancer? Well, you want to look for love, security, nurturing home, that kind of thing, which is what I have. And in the same sense, when you have Uranus, right, a planet like Uranus, which represents freedom and innovation and unconventionality, also in Cancer, it's a formula, for example, just using my own chart as an example, it's a formula for confusion. It's a formula for basically trying to upend what looks to be the traditional nuclear family, and that's exactly what the Uranus in Cancer generation, I think, is doing. They were the first ones to start questioning, for example, in the 50s and the 60s, the Ozzie and Harriet, Gracie and Alan, and George Burns kind of thing, where people slept in separate beds, and they don't talk about intimate things with other people. They don't hug or touch that much. And what that changed was, from my standpoint, is we started looking at other forms or other ways of relating. So my generation from the 50s has been sort of like a first wave, and then the 60s and the 70s. So I've seen this progression, and as Armand and I were talking about Pluto in Libra. Pluto can be very obsessive about getting into a relationship, but in Libra it's also about, well, I don't know if I want to be in a relationship, or I don't know if I want to be in a traditional kind of thing. So anybody out there, any of you who are listening that have conflicted feelings about security and freedom, or intimacy, or just wanting to play the field, or needing a marriage, or maybe needing more freedom than that. These are big questions because it ties in with what's happening in the evolution of the species and how we're relating masculine, feminine to nature and to business and to societal and religious issues, spiritual issues. So relationship is an underpinning to just about everything that we're familiar with in this culture, on this world at this time. So that was the reason for having Armand, someone like Armand, who's really delved into the astrology of relating and relationships. So it looks like we've got Armand back. He's coming back online. We have the miracle of the internet, which is an Aquarian Uranus thing. But sometimes it's unreliable, or sometimes we get things like sunspot activity and coronal mass ejections interfering with our satellite feeds and our Skype and our smartphones and everything. So, thank you for hanging in there. We'll see if he's going to be back here in a second. And let me find hang on a second. Are you there?
Isaac, I'm back.
Yay. All right, then. I just kind of did some fill on some generational stuff, threw a little bit of my personal chart in there to show where we can get confused about what we want, what we need in terms of security and freedom. And so I'm going to get back into, you were talking about the moon signs, or the moon as a factor in relationship astrology.
I'm sorry, I lost you for a second again.
Okay, well, we get back into talking about the moon in relationship to astrology, relationship.
So I think that, I was talking about water signs tend to have a high security need. Fire signs have a strong desire for, moving forward. They like to move. They like things to be moving. They like to have a good sense of propelling. And if things aren't going well, then I think that they are usually comfortable to look towards the future. And I think that is, whether things are going well or they're not going well, I think that there's a tendency to look towards the future with fire signs.
Yeah, and that's what we're in right now.
Yeah, exactly. Earth signs tend to look very much at the present, and that is, by all means, Capricorn is thinking where are things going, and and Virgo's, looking at the details. Virgo,
right.
If we're keeping the place neat, then things are okay. But Earth signs tend to be a little bit more concerned with the present. And then air signs would like to be able to discuss and to talk about it, and to, like security. Security is found in communication. It's complex, and we're talking about different signs, and they have different approaches and so on. But it's as a shorthand, the air signs, Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius, like to communicate, and there is a certain amount of security to be found in getting information and sharing things.
Well, the air signs, I mean, it's like communication. If we don't have communication, then relationships just don't function. Right.
And there's that awareness. I think with the sun signs, I think sun signs very similar, but then we're not talking about basic security needs. The moon, in a way, kind of pulls us back to our earliest experiences, and it's very hard to sort of think about it in an objective way. The moon is just there as an emotional reaction. The moon is just there as an approach to things that sort of functions. You can bring it to awareness, but it will function regardless.
It's sort of like our reptilian brain is. I mean, it's just real primal.
Its roots go back that deep, yeah, and that's the thing, and if we're not bringing it forward, if we're not bringing it into consciousness, if we're not working on emotional reactions, then it can get pretty reptilian. Yeah.
Okay. That's when you get the romance or the love gone bad turns to hate, or there's violence and dysfunctional families and all that. Okay, get it.
And you can say, it's easy sometimes when we talk about like getting reptilian. It's a little easier with some of the signs. I won't mention them, but some of the signs. Well, if you just look at and I'm not saying anything for I have a Cancer moon. I'll put that out there. So I'm not saying anything about anybody else.
Right.
But we're talking about a crab as the symbol. It's not that hard to say, okay, well, this seems to be associated with a fairly primitive creature, and in the moon in the sense of Cancer and the crab. Well, okay, you kind of get that. Aquarius, it might seem like, well, how do Aquarians get reptilian? We have an Aquarius moon. How that seems to be a very highly developed, societally oriented moon.
Yeah.
And yet, you know what? The basic flavor of the sign can function at many, many different levels. And so, Aquarians, okay, well, I'm going to find security in the group. I'm going to find security holding on to my ideals. I'm going to find security, with my vision of things. And I'm going to sort of regress and hold on to it. It doesn't really matter what you're holding on to. If you're holding on to your ideals, or if you're holding on to your sense of community, if you're doing it in a sort of primitive way, that's no better than me and my Cancer moon. And one thing, I'm gonna regress and go get a pizza.
I'm gonna go sulk.
I'm gonna go sulk and get a pizza.
Well, I'm gonna throw you a curveball.
Do so.
Okay, is that all right?
Yeah. Well, we'll see.
Oh. All right. Okay. One of the things that is, it's there. I see it in a lot of different ways. People questioning, relationship forms, and this isn't pertain, as far as gender. I think it's across the board. People are questioning the institution of marriage. They're questioning serial monogamy. They're questioning, there's some people questioning to the point where they say, I don't want to be in a relationship, and so they're asexual people, they're just like, I don't want to have anything to do with it. It's too much drama. Mm-hmm. And then there's another group that say, well, we're going to explore non-monogamy or responsible non-monogamy or polyamory. And, there's some well-known people that have actually adopted that lifestyle and are very open about it, like the actress Tilda Swinton. She and her lover and her husband all live together in a castle somewhere up in northeast Scotland. But I think people are kind of going, I want my security. I want my freedom. I want my choice. I want to love who I want to love when I want to love them, which is a little bit certainly like this Uranus and Aries kind of yin-integrity movement of saying, we used to have plan. We used to have, sit down and do the plan and execute the plan to achieve a goal. We're going to raise a family. We're going to have a nice house. We're going to pay it off in 30 years, et cetera, et cetera. That's all out the window, seemingly right now, or at this moment anyway. And people are going, well, can I have both and? Can I have my cake and eat it too? Can I have, instead of going through all this nasty betrayal, being people cheating and everything, people are fed up with a lot of drama. And I think that is showing itself in people going, well, this isn't working for me, and it hasn't been working, so I'm going to try something different, or I'm just going to take myself offline. I'll just become a social media freak. Or there's a young generation of people right now that don't even know how to date, and they are not going to. They don't know what to do around women, young men in their 20s. So I'm seeing all these people in crisis around the nature of relating and connecting. What do you think about the current era, astrologically, by transit, and we're talking probably the last decade, that has been the most influential aspect to upsetting everybody's apple carts?
Well, I think you make a really good point with the I like to have the cake and eat it too type of thing. It's wow, yes, I'd like to have freedom and I'd like to have security. That's and I tell you the truth, I don't think it's restricted only to relationship. I think that's something that you find in the world of careers, and I want to do what I want to do and express myself and who I am, and I don't want to be, boxed into some, cubicle sort of mindset, let alone physical, and yet, I'd really like to eat dinner too. Like to be able to pay the rent, and get groceries, and so and the sense of security. We all feel the need for freedom, and yet we are in many ways sort of held back. I think that the social media aspect of it is something that is really quite key. It's a very key component, and it's great that you brought it up. And what I think about, Uranus and Neptune each going through each other's signs, through the last decade, I really think, there was this opening up of information to such an extent with Uranus in Pisces and Neptune in Aquarius. I mean that point. Do you remember the time? I will make up something. Let us say the Bon religion of Tibet. There was a time when you learn about, let's say, the similarity of the deities between Bon and Buddhism in Tibet. You had to go down to the local library and hope for the best, probably go to a university library. Now, nobody listening to the show couldn't get that information in 5 minutes.
Oh, my. That's true. That's true.
Nobody listening to this could, in 5 minutes, we could all have that information. And ideas and opinions and seeing what other people are doing. Facebook, whatever you want to say about it, you see what other people are doing with their lives. You see how they're looking at the world, and the information is incredible.
Yeah, it's all in display, and everybody's out hanging out there with it. See, I remember that time before Facebook, before a cell phone even. I mean,
the Rockford Files was my introduction to answering machines.
Well, there you go.
I remember when you used to call people, and if they weren't home, the phone just kept ringing.
Exactly. Nobody picked up and didn't go to an answer phone. Okay, we're unfortunately running close on time, but one of the things that we mentioned in the pre-show info is the prominent thing today, and what do you see happening in the next decade? I mean, we're talking Mars and Saturn right now. I mean, we've been through not just the Uranus-Pluto thing, but through a hellacious Saturn transit. Starting back in 2012. And one of the things I always remember best about that Saturn in Scorpio transit was it started October 5th, 2012, and less than 7 days later, the whole Jimmy Savile pedophilia scandal blew up in the British press. So we have these two characters, Mars and Saturn, today and tomorrow meeting up in the sign of Sagittarius, and that's prominent. And then Jupiter's going to go in Libra, Venus is going to go in Libra next month. What do we have to look forward to, or what do we have to be contending with this year and maybe the next few years ahead? Any ideas?
I think Jupiter in Libra will bring some optimism to the picture. I think that is something that will be helpful. Yep. Some of the stuff that I think, we had strong legislative and very positive legislative changes with Saturn in Libra, because it really was the opening up of gay marriage as a legal entity. I think that Jupiter in Libra will further things along and will expand the changes that Saturn made. Will open up more possibilities that we may have to wait for Saturn to aspect Libra or come around again. again or something. But I for them to be, for to really sort of solidify. But I think that Jupiter will help to open up a lot of stuff. I think Neptune in Pisces it's a very spiritual placement. The opening up to all kinds of things on a sort of psycho-spiritual plane is apparent. And I think when we apply that to relationship, I think that is something that is, Neptune in Pisces is a little bit of like, it is really the urge to merge. You want to, you want to open up to greater possibilities, that you do want to bring this sort of spirituality into relationship, into every area of life. So, I'm really, really very excited about that. I think that we have some good stuff coming up in terms of that. But Uranus and Aries is, Uranus and Aries now, especially that it's past Pluto, is, my way or the highway is another voice.
With the Uranus retrograde between now and the end of the year, what does that read like to you?
I see retrogrades as being an intensification of whatever the planet is trying to do.
Okay.
We're certainly not. It's harder to express it, and I think the fact that it's harder to express it is why we are seeing during this retrograde a lot of individuals going off the rails. There are a lot of folks that just seem to have they just they got one thought in their head and that's it, and there they go, and we've seen some real tragic stuff as a result of it.
Exactly.
But Uranus and Aries is a strong voice for independence, and there are a lot of voices. There are a lot of voices in all of our heads. There are a lot of voices out there in the collective. There are a lot of themes running through that we're trying to find some sort of dialogue among. And, Neptune and Pisces is saying, hey, why can't we all just be open and merge, and why can't it all just be easy, and why can't we be compassionate, and why can't we show love, in all circumstances to all beings. And Uranus and Aries is saying, get out of my way.
and the Mars Saturn thing is adding attention here, and then we have the Saturn Neptune square going on, and that's adding to sort of how do you nail things down and get them to feel solid, because there is no solidity right now, in a sense.
There isn't. Although I think, the opening Neptune-Saturn square in November presented us with the sense, the sense of uncertainty has been around for, certainly, Uranus and Pluto help with that, but Neptune, Saturn opens it up. When the retrograde square happened at the end of May, and really all through June with Neptune stationing and so on, it was a very Neptunian month. And as we go forward, particularly with Mars out of bounds and with the eclipses and so on, this is going to be a really intense fall time. I think the next few months are going to be really, really intense on a lot of levels.
I agree. I think October is going to be the first starting to settle out kind of thing, and then the end of November we got Chiron going back into direct motion, and then Uranus after that. So I think it's still an unsettled year, but with more optimism. But it's like relationships, I think, feel like are going to be in flux for a decade or more. I don't know. The whole relationship arena feels like it's going through a huge examination. And when we had lost you on the call, I was saying there seems to be every aspect of human experience right now, the underpinnings of it are how do we relate to each other, and that has ripples to everything: family, business, the economy, the ecology, everything.
Yeah, in a two-way street too. Everything else impacts upon relationships as well. Yeah, I think this is, we're talking about, huge changes that, I arbitrarily started back in the 1940s and highlighted the change period starting in the 70s. But this is a rewriting of many scripts, really, of changing the whole way we see things, work and relationship and so many things, going from a sort of Saturnian, security, safety, what can we depend on type of thing, conformity, into a kind of openness to all different types of possibilities that will allow individual expression. But, first of all, not everybody's on board. There's all kinds of things that have to happen, and we're going to be working it out for a very long time, I think.
Well, with Saturn in Sag over the next 2 years, and we're going to wrap it up here, we'll synopsize. It's we get the religious aspect here, and we get the religion thing going on, or the truth about religion, or the truth about beliefs, even. And I think that is affecting people in the relationship arena as well.
Yes, certainly it is. Okay.
Yeah, because they're questioning.
What's the big picture?
Exactly. What is the big picture? Where is this going? Where what does it mean? What is the truth? So I think that's the fuel that's kind of underpinning everything. These Saturn is like, it's like, let's get real.
Saturn tests your belief, and then Saturn says, but you're supposed to believe this, right? It sort of gives you both sides of the story.
Exactly.
He's not picking sides. He's just making it more intense.
Well, one of the things that is, is there anything? You wrote this book, Separating Aspects. We've got about a minute and a half, and I want to remind people that if they want synastry compatibility readings, by all means, get a hold of Armand at www.integralastrology.com. Try to get a hold of his books, which I'm sure are on Amazon. Separating Aspects is the most recent. What can you leave the listeners with, leave me with, that sort of gives us hope or gives us something to shoot for?
Well, I hope I don't think we've been that discouraging. I think that things are changing, but I think that things are changing to open up a greater potential for each of us to be who we are. And the problem is that we have to really step up and into that, and that means getting out of our comfort zones in many ways. And it's difficult. There's some uncertainty, but I think that it's ultimately pretty good.
Yeah, I think I feel that too, and I felt a change in the air just in the last day or so. Anyway, we've got about 5 seconds left. Armand, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Hopefully we can have you back on again. This is Isaac George saying good night to everybody, and talk to you soon.